All right, everyone. How are you doing today? It is Monday. You know what time it is. It is that time again. We've got a special show for you today. I want to make sure that everything is going well. So we'll give it a second. Let some more of you come on into the studio and join us. I see several of you are already in and waiting. All right. Looks like we're doing pretty good there. Fantastic. I love it. All right. So today we have a very special guest in studio. Very excited. I know that many of you watched the debate the other day with the three candidates, and I offered and extended to them to do one-on-ones, and that is what they are doing. At least one took me up on that offer, which is Brynn Felix, who is in studio with me today. Brynn, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. And I just want to thank you again for, first of all, for hosting that debate. I think we've had many forums and opportunities to answer questions, but yours were questions that we'd never been asked before. And I think it really helped, tease us out as candidates and who we are and what we believe in. So thank you for doing that. And thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know what? I want to get into just that question. So I like to do things pretty organically, right? So if someone says something that's like, oh man, that really kind of piqued my interest, I want to revisit that first. But first, let people know, my audience know, who you are, what you're running for, why you're running for. Give us the 5 W's, if you will.
Sure. And also, where should I be? Should I be
Your
looking at
camera
you?
is
Okay.
there.
Okay. Um, so my name is Brynn Felix. I'm running for state representative for the 23rd Legislative District, position 2. That was the who and the why, or where. So the why. So I started my advocacy career before I became an attorney at the ACLU of Washington. I started volunteering there in 2011, which became a staff position. I did outreach and direct lobbying at our legislature on issues around marriage equality, so retaining it at the ballot in 2012 as part of the organizing campaign, supporting the voting rights organizing, which was spearheaded by One America, but the ACLU was part of that coalition. I participated doing doc review in the lawsuit where the ACLU sued the city of Yakima for violating the Federal Voting Rights Act.
Okay.
And it is very hard to win a Federal Voting Rights Act case, but the ACLU did, and that's what really gave the momentum for the organizing around then passing a statewide Voting Rights Act, which took several more years. But I think when you tell a local jurisdiction, you're either going to have the hammer of the Federal Voting Rights Act, or you can take the opportunity to change your own electoral system as your demographics change. It was a pretty convincing story by the end.
Gotcha.
But in any case, and I was doing work around anti-death penalty, both organizing and lobbying, coalition building. And it was at that point when I realized, someday I would love to work here. I've been an advocate on the outside, working toward reform, working to promote civil rights, working with Democrats and Republicans and everybody on the outskirts and in between, and that I would love to try to make a difference from within the system. I then went to law school to get more tools in my toolkit.
Nice.
I spent my last semester working as a law clerk for Senator Patty Murray on the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. And that was an interesting time because that was 2018, during the Trump administration, the first Trump and hopefully last Trump administration,
Right.
in my opinion.
So, well, let me ask you.
Sure.
Law school can be very terrifying. So,
Yes.
all the aspiring lawyers out there, any tips?
Yes.
Any thoughts on that?
I was a later in life law student insofar as my first day of law school was my 30th birthday.
Wow.
Yes.
All
It was a
right.
great way to start off my 30s. And what I would tell aspiring law students is that know why you want to go. You can make such a difference as a lawyer. Some of our most important rights have been fought for and defended and advanced by attorneys. But I always suggest to everybody who's thinking about going, take a couple years, work out in the workforce. You will have such a greater appreciation for some of the cases when it's less abstract. Also, when you go straight, kindergarten through maybe university, maybe to law school, which we lovingly refer to as K through JDs, it can be hard to know who you are and know why you're there. And when grades have been an external validator, that can be really damaging in law school. Have a perspective. And I think it helped me. I was a teacher in several different areas before I was a lawyer, and knowing my learning style helped give me grace.
Nice.
It's all about in law school, it's how quickly can you issue spot, and it's kind of a speed race. But I'm not a fast reader. I'm a slower, deeper thinker, slower processor. Law school doesn't reward those things. And it's important to know that about yourself and to give yourself grace. And it helped me decide, in law school, they try to push you into boxes and to check different boxes. And I got to look at the box and say, is this actually going to help me with what do I want to accomplish or not? And so take time, go out into the world. Maybe the law school is the right path for you. It ended up being for me, but I waited purposely 8 years after I,
Wow.
left with my bachelor's to go to law school. And it was a really enriching experience. And I loved law school because of that.
How long was law school?
3 years.
3 years?
Although there are also alternate pathways, and I want to take the opportunity to plug Seattle University,
Yeah, please do.
who has, I think it was one of the earliest hybrid law school opportunities, in Washington, recognizing that we have legal deserts, that not everybody can go to Seattle or to Spokane for law school. SU has created this amazing hybrid program to help people work and live in the Tri-Cities, but be able to attend law school. Because typically where you go to law school is where you end up practicing. And we have a lot of rural deserts, and it's a flexible program. So if you participate in that one, there's night school. There's it's just really flexible and can help people who are managing multiple jobs, being caretakers, and help you get that degree. But that would be, I believe, a 4-year program.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Legal desert. That's a new term. There's so many different gaps and holes that people don't realize until they attempt to go down that path, right? And then you look and you say, okay, so why aren't there more lawyers of color in this particular sector, right? And so you're not looking at the external factors that lead into that.
Yes, and I will take a moment to say the legal deserts have led to an access to justice problem with inequities, racial inequities, certainly geographic inequities when we're talking about where lawyers are to get help.
So what type of law do you practice?
I serve as general counsel at Peninsula Community Health Services. So it just means I'm a generalist. I'm in-house. My client is Peninsula Community Health Services, which is a wonderful agency. I want to make sure I'm separating my candidacy from my role, at PCHS. But I want to plug the agency because they play such an important role in our community. They are a federally qualified health center, which means it has a federal designation where they must serve everyone who walks in their doors without regard for insurance or ability to pay.
Gotcha.
Right. PCHS does not ask about documentation status. It has, 30 some clinics, 12 of which are mobile clinics. It really focuses on meeting people where they are to provide primary care. So dental care, medical, behavioral health, which is counseling and substance use disorder treatment, and in-house pharmacies. So they're a wonderful agency. They do a lot for transportation access for their patients as well as language access too. So that's, I do a little bit of everything there.
All right, so let's pull out of there. So you gave us a little bit about your education and what you do and kind of the whys, why you're running for representative.
Yes, well, I'm running on what I'm calling building our infrastructure of opportunity. And there are 4 pillars that I put into that. One being equitable access to healthcare services, which is what I do in my day-to-day. We need to work toward increasing coverage so that everybody has health insurance coverage. And also, once people have coverage, then the next question is, are there enough places to access? And that goes to healthcare workforce issues that we've seen here in Kitsap, specialty services, primary care. And what I've been participating in at PCHS is advocating to our legislature to direct resources here so we can build out things like dental clinics and medical clinics. And I would like to highlight an exciting project just down the road from where we are right now.
Nice.
PCHS is building a medical respite facility, which is a 22-bed facility. There are a ton of healthcare and local government partners that are a part of this project. And the goal is to build a 22-bed medical respite so that people who are experiencing homelessness, when they are discharged from the hospital, have a safe place to recuperate for up to 30 days.
Oh,
So once
nice.
they're no longer in an acute status, but maybe they need help with wound care, and it's not safe to go to, well, certainly not safe to discharge to the street, but
Mhm.
even shelters that don't have the ability to assist with some clinical needs that are still needed. This is a place where they can stay for up to 30 days. There will be comprehensive services provided as well. And the goal is to come up with a housing plan to be able to safely discharge people into housing. And at the same time, to complement this, PCHS has become a housing agency in the last year, building out permanent supportive housing and as well as workforce housing for PCHS employees on Wheaton Way.
So let me ask you a question. Would that potentially impact the hospital discharging indigent people that are homeless from the emergency room out into the street?
Well, this is not so. People are supposed to go to the hospital for acute care needs.
Mhm.
We believe that it will reduce utilization of the ER. Um, I think the hospital has been a great partner in this, and they are looking forward to be able to discharge people safely. Because if there's not a safe place to discharge someone, you can't let them go.
Mm.
They are currently boarding people who are no longer in acute status, but can't safely go to the street, right? Because they don't have a safe place to be. So we think that being able to fully recuperate, come up with some, hopefully a housing discharge plan will make it so that we're not seeing as much of that rotating door to the emergency department at our local hospital.
Gotcha. So tell me more about your position on healthcare and what you want to achieve.
I would like us to move toward universal health care. And there's a lot of different thoughts about how to approach that realistically. Right now, I think it is most feasible to slowly and incrementally expand eligibility for Apple Health. We've seen in the last session, the last biennium, that the legislature created an expansion program so that undocumented immigrants have the ability to receive Apple Health, which was the right thing to do. And, I was again in Olympia this session advocating to help fund that program as well. I have talked to so many people who have gotten a promotion at their work, maybe $2 more an hour, and now they're kicked off of Apple Health, but they can't afford private insurance.
Mm.
I've talked to elders who are not quite old enough to get their Medicare card, but can't afford private insurance, and maybe they're 63, 64 and are not covered. So we see still a lot of people just outside of the bounds of eligibility who really need this coverage. So I would like to see an incremental expansion of that, as well as, of course, more funding to go to organizations that have been building out our healthcare infrastructure. And in addition to PCHS, we're seeing Kitsap Mental Health Services has done a tremendous job, and they've got this wonderful vision to build out additional schools, additional beds. Here in Kitsap, we don't have a medical detox facility as well. There's a lot of gaps.
I'm a big advocate for that,
and a lot of opportunities too. So,
and I'm a big advocate as a transportation company. We are contracting with several organizations, taking folks as far as Yakima and Spokane.
Yep.
When a bed becomes open, and so that's how dire it is.
Yes.
And when someone is ready to tap out, you have to be there because that might be the time that they're ready, right. and it changes.
Yeah. And so, I think speaking of transportation, what I would like to see in our healthcare system is taking a really broad view of health equity and considering transportation as part of the healthcare service, considering language access as part of the healthcare service. I sometimes forget to call out housing as a plank of my infrastructure of opportunity because in my line of work, housing is healthcare. Same thing with food security. It is an invisible crisis in our community that so many people go to bed hungry, wake up hungry, kids are going to school hungry. And we've done a lot to increase food access in schools, which is wonderful, and we need to continue moving in that direction. But we still know that kids and their families just don't have enough to eat, right? And that needs to be part of healthcare. And it's frustrating to me sometimes as an advocate that those are different in the policy world. Those are separate funding streams, and I would like to see us take a more holistic view of what healthcare really is.
So when I hear holistic, what I really hear you saying is really getting in and looking at the connective tissue. Folks think of healthcare as just going in and getting physical health or mental health, but looking at housing and its impact, transportation and its impact. And so being able to articulate that is important because I think people miss that. And they're wondering why are people still suffering from high blood pressure when everything otherwise seems to be okay and they're having this stress and having strokes and things of that nature. You're smiling, so you must agree.
I do. Well, I'm smiling because I was going to add to that. Also, access to legal services is part of healthcare. At PCHS, we have developed the first what we call medical legal partnership. I think on the peninsula, there's the concept is that a lawyer is part of your care team, and that people have what we call health harming legal needs. So if you're about to face an eviction, that is going to be a health harming legal need. Someone who has a juvenile record that's getting in the way of their ability to get a job or to apply for housing, that's a health harming legal need. Someone who needs an advance directive. I would advocate that regardless of what your age is, you should have an advance directive in place so that you are able to make those healthcare decisions for when you may become incapacitated. And the ability to change a legal marker. If there's a transgender patient, they want to change their legal sex. Not being able to do that is harmful, and it's harmful to people's wellness. And so PCHS has developed a partnership. There's a partnership with Kitsap Legal Services. So if we screen all patients for what we call social determinants of health at these medical and dental visits, and if someone circles that they're about to get evicted, we do a warm handoff to Kitsap Legal Services, who has a housing justice program embedded. PCHS does not do any litigation or any adversarial work, but there's a lot of transactional legal work that can be done, like helping people where legally, appropriate to vacate and seal, juvenile record, those kinds of things. So we consider that part of healthcare. And it's, some might say it's a little bit radical, but we really look at the whole person and like to address their wellness.
Well, I like radical. So for those of you that may be just joining us, we are interviewing Brynn Felix. In her title here, you can go ahead and check out her website to get more detail on her issues and more information. Right now, we're discussing what is important to Brynn. Why is she running? And she has 4 pillars. And the first one that we were discussing is healthcare. Can we go on to your second one?
Sure. Well, I think housing was also a piece of that. We've touched on that. And
elaborate a little more on the housing piece.
Sure. We have a shortage of housing. I think across the board, this is not disputed. I think we need to be investing in, again, those public-private partnerships to build out our lower and middle part of our continuum. There's a lot we need to do in terms of investments and some regulatory change to make it easier.
You're right.
Make it easier to build in a way that comports with our Growth Management Act, right? So I completely support rent stabilization. We need to start by making sure people aren't getting kicked out of their housing. We know that unexpected huge rent increases is a driver of homelessness. We need to stop that. So I am a huge proponent of rent stabilization, as, again, my work.
Describe that. What is rent stabilization for those that may not know? What does that mean, and how will that impact them?
Sure. And rent stabilization is different from rent control. So I'll focus on rent stabilization, which is the idea that a landlord will not be able to raise the rent more than whatever percentage is decided on by the legislature. So last year there was a bill saying a landlord cannot increase their rent more than 5%. And that
is that annually?
Annually.
So every year the landlord could increase the rent by 5%.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So rent control is you can't raise the rent, period, right? And it just kind of is more stagnant in that way.
Right.
Rent stabilization allows the the rent to go up, but not more than that certain percentage.
Gotcha.
And within that bill, there was also discussions around notice periods. You need to give a certain amount of notice before you're going to be raising the rent, and giving more notice than
Keep going. You're okay.
typical. Okay. So yes, I believe that if you're a renter, you need to have a bit more certainty in what you are going to be expecting. A 30% jump in your rent is untenable for a lot of people. And then when you only have 30 days notice, you're scrambling to find a place. And with such low housing stock, you can see how people end up couch surfing, or living in their car between trying to find a new place to live, or just having to leave our area altogether and move to other states. I've had friends that just said, I love Kitsap, but I just can't afford it.
Well, thank you for explaining rent stabilization. I think that's important, because when candidates run, they throw terminology out there and people, I kind of understand that, but how is that actually going to impact me? And so are there some other things aside from rent stabilization that's important to you in regards to housing, to help it be more affordable and sustainable for people?
And I would like to take the opportunity to highlight the Low Income Housing Alliance, which does great work. Their PAC side is called the Alliance. I'll have to come back to that.
Lehigh or something.
It's not called the Low Income Housing Alliance on the C4 side, but their C4 side has endorsed my campaign. And I want to highlight, they've got this great, what they call, roadmap to housing justice that I support. And it's very comprehensive. It talks not just about rent stabilization for tenants, but access to housing. I mean, there's some zoning changes that will make it hopefully easier to build, to grow, transit-oriented development, growing around access to transit, access to services, rather than the idea of sprawl. But also incorporating an important racial justice lens and looking at our past history, where Black Americans don't have the same advantage of intergenerational transfer of wealth. And so there's discussions around, how do we make sure that Black families have access to down payments, rent down payment assistance. So we're also closing the racial gap when it comes to home ownership and things of that nature.
So what is, because I'm part of, at least I get the newsletter, right? So I'm informed in that way. But what specifically do you know that's being done for Black communities? One of my consternation has been, folks tend to use Black stats, and then they say, okay, look how bad it is for the Black community, Black women, Black men, Black folks in general. And then it's, so we need to do all this stuff for everybody, right? So what specifically is being done in that regard? Because you brought up, Black people being impacted at a higher degree than other populations specifically.
Well, specifically targeting down payment assistance for people who have been subject to populations who have not had the opportunity to buy homes in certain areas due to redlining, right? It's not we've had disproportionality, therefore everybody needs access. It really, I think, is more tailored to Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, similar to investments in BIPOC entrepreneurs. It's not, we need more small businesses so everybody has an opportunity with seed investments. There's very purposeful targeting of resources to those communities that have not historically had equitable access to opportunities.
Where are those at? Okay, so rent stabilization, which is I'm definitely on board for, and I think rent control does have some issues. And there's the flip side too of the homeowner that is also either renting out a room or renting out a second property, as they are elderly and they're supplementing that, and they can't survive if they weren't doing that either, right? It's this symbiotic relationship, and so there's other entities that could probably be targeted to help out with having affordable housing and rent for people.
And I want to plug rural ADUs as well. Now, this needs to be done really thoughtfully and mindfully, because there are, legitimate environmental concerns as well. I happen to have I live in a log cabin, and there was a detached barn historically that was part of, you know, next to it, um, and the prior owner had turned it into like a little studio. That cannot be permitted, and it's a problem. I mean, in the end, I just let my friends stay there when they're between jobs or between housing, but I'm not the only one, right? There's a lot of units that are pre-existing that are out there that should be able to be rented. I would love to be able to invite a family to rent, but I legally can't.
Right.
And so we just again offer it up to friends and family who need a place to stay. But there's an opportunity and there's so much need to increase our housing stock. Let's start with what we have and be able to use it. And
Could we do some other things too? Like, I don't know if this is in your purview, but a lot of folks will come to me and say, why don't we exercise eminent domain on these owners that are just allowing these buildings to be blight, and they're doing their depreciation year after year and leaving it empty because they're incentivized to not have a renter or not do anything with it. I think of the Sizzler on Wheaton Way, the old Sizzler. I think of the old Denny's. There's tons of buildings in the Bremerton area that could be given fair market value for and then repurposed, right? When COVID hit, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, we need to rent out the motels and make this livable space for folks. Um, we just need to think outside the box and do something, right? We know that a lot of Black families lost their homes and lost their communities through that particular act, putting in stadiums and freeways and everything else historically. But this is a tool that could be used to help solve the homeless issue. Is that something that you agree with? Is that something that you can advocate for as a state rep, eminent domain in that way?
that's an interesting question. I think we need to be looking at all options on the table. The one of the first things I think about are just property rights. I mean, you're talking about the families who had their property taken away in order to build out public infrastructure. There's going to be constitutional issues with how that would be utilized, and I'm not going to say I'm going to rule anything out, but it's one, as an attorney and kind of thinking about our constitutional process and property rights, it would we would need to look very closely and carefully about how something like that would be implemented as well, if that makes sense.
An easier one might be your example of the log cabin and the extra space, right? Because we're in a different time now. Growing up traditionally, you had a dining room. And when I grew up, my dad's dining room had a formal place setting on it. And it was Easter or Christmas or, Sunday dinner, we would use that, right? But now many people don't use their dining rooms in the traditional sense. And so there are some different ways that we can do some things. I think of Oxford Homes and renting out rooms. Are there some things that you can do as a state rep to say, hey, this isn't permitted because this space doesn't have a closet, that you can amend those things and change those requirements so people can actually rent out a space. Maybe another one might be you have two families that are on state assistance and saying, you know what, why don't you come together? Maybe it's an older family. I'll use two single mothers as an example on this fictional example. There's an older single mother and a younger single mother. The older one has the wisdom, and the younger one has the kind of social media. I'm making a lot of stereotypes, but you know those two families can come together and blend, and instead of penalizing them and saying, hey, you both can't have food stamps in this space, or you both can't use a voucher in this space, that would create a symbiotic household where you're putting two families together where they're going to be stronger together. versus saying, hey, maybe we can have them separate if that can even happen, because we still know there's not enough housing. So that I think there's a lot of different unique things that can be done. Is that something that you can do as state rep, or is that something that you can also advocate for?
Yeah, I mean, that blending families, and also, which is not necessarily an American tradition, but it is in many other cultures, having more intergenerational families living together under one roof. I don't have any specific solutions around that right now, but I love hearing new approaches, new ideas, and am always open to listening to them, looking at what is feasible, talking to my colleagues about it. I'm Senator Yasmin Trudeau is she's an endorser of my campaign, but more importantly, she is one of our strongest housing advocates in the legislature. And so one of the things that I fully intend to do, if and hopefully when I'm elected, is to sit down with her and say, on the Senate side, what is this menu of housing you're looking at? Talk to Representative Jessica Bateman, those who have been digging into these issues, leading on them, looking at new ways, ideas outside of the box, and how can I support that? Because I am hoping, if I am in the legislature, that I would be on the transportation, environment and energy, and healthcare committee, or if Representative Simmons remains on healthcare, going on to education. So I wouldn't plan to be on a housing committee, but would very much want to make sure that I am supporting how I can, supporting from behind those who are leading and those who are real experts in this area as well.
Nice.
Yeah,
I like it.
And bringing our community's ideas to the people that are really leading on these issues in the legislature, and saying, how can we incorporate these ideas? Where does it make sense? What is feasible as well?
All right. We are interviewing Brynn Felix, having a great conversation. If you have questions, type them in the chat. If time allows, we'll get to a few. But man, we got so much more to get into. Now, we've covered two, right? We've covered housing, we've covered healthcare, we kind of hit transportation a little bit. Environment is another one.
Yes,
Let's talk about
justice.
environment.
Sure. Climate change is a healthcare issue, and climate change is, again, one that disproportionately impacts communities of color, especially those who are in more urban areas. It's interesting. We've been doorbelling from Bainbridge down to Bremerton, and regularly our team talking about how much hotter it is, in downtown Bremerton and these downtown cores, just because there's less green space, and fewer kind of heat sinks, and we viscerally feel the difference in urban versus an area where there's a lot more trees and open green space. But I do want to sit on environment and energy. I am proud to be endorsed by the Washington Conservation Action, which is one of our strongest advocacy organizations here in Washington. Environmental justice also has so many different components to it. It's an umbrella, but we need to be mitigating and, if possible, reversing the effects of climate change. We need to be reducing reliance on fossil fuels, preserving our legacy forests, because we know older trees are better at carbon sequestration. There is a ton of local leadership going on by environmental organizations, and I think it's the job of lawmakers to elevate that. One, just use their platform to highlight and to bring more people in to these coalitions. The Great Peninsula Conservancies doing incredible work to preserve land. A lot of these housing trust organizations as well, working on housing, but in an environmentally sustainable way and growing. When we can't talk about housing without also touching on how we do that is going to impact environmental sustainability. Sprawl means that we are not distributing energy efficiently, things like that. And when we talk about local leadership, the sovereign nations whose lands are within the boundaries of the 23rd Legislative District are doing tremendous leadership around habitat restoration, salmon habitat restoration, cleaning up shorelines, and preventing pollution and runoff entering into the Puget Sound. So helping amplify, helping if possible, appropriating funds to those projects that are helping our environment as well is another big priority of mine. There's a bill, there's a group, Zero Waste Washington, that is looking at how are we packaging materials? How can we make things, how can we produce less waste as well? It's going to be a multi-pronged strategy, but protecting our air, our land, our water is something that is so important for us for 7 generations from now. And I'm excited. It's an area where I've very much enjoyed. I love living here. I enjoy hiking and being in the outdoors and teaching children, in the outdoors. I want to highlight Islandwood and all they do to teach our youngsters about environmental stewardship. But I've done a ton of work in education policy, civil rights, healthcare. I've not done a ton of environmental policy work, and I'm really excited to learn and to dig in and to grow and lead in that area too.
Let's talk a little bit about environmental justice. For me, and I want to share with you and the audience, I'm part of some organizations that are really big on environmental justice. And unfortunately, I often find myself on the other side of the issue
Oh, really?
with them. And my issue is they advocate for environmental justice for the BIPOC community, right? And people at large, right? Uh, However, what I see is the missing piece of the negative impact as we rush down this road of EVs, right? Electronic vehicles. I should not use acronyms when I can uh, get away from it. The issue is that many of us can't afford to buy an electric vehicle, can't sustain it. When that battery goes, that's going to be a problem. Many of us live in areas where we do a lot of driving and we don't have the time to stop and charge that vehicle. And then the pieces that are put in place to make it affordable, like let's say a rebate, is okay. So you pay for it, and then you get a rebate in the mail. Well, I don't have the money in the first place. I need the so the advocacy is really punitive to the Black community, but low income people, respectively, right? And that piece to me doesn't get talked about a lot. And so I kind of stand on that side to say, hey, I'm all for environmental justice, but it's so frustrating that now there are a lot of well-to-do people that are talking about environmental justice, and now we need to reduce our carbon emissions. They're still jetting it up. They're not taking advantage of Zoom meetings and things of that nature. You talk about, urban sprawl. But they buy, their properties out because they can afford to commute in and do these things. And, these 15-minute cities that is being advocated for, and multimodal transportation that's being advocated for, seems like a lot of gentrified thinking, right? We look at the bike lanes. It's really big here in the city of Bremerton, right? Almost every week, it seems like folks are coming out for bike lanes, bike lanes, bike lanes. But then when I look and I see who's using the bike lanes, it doesn't seem to be the employee working at Burger King or the person working at Lowe's, right? It's the, weekend riders and, when they need to get in their car and go and do what they got to do, they have that ability to do so, but they've got this bike lane. And it's all great. I don't have any problem with bike lanes, but the emphasis and the priority on that when folks can't get to work because there isn't public transportation that runs frequently or in the spaces that they need for it to run, and it doesn't work for them. So then they're stuck. And so that's very frustrating for me. And I just want to share that with you and kind of get your thoughts on that. If you are elected, that you have that consciousness in back of mind that, yes, we need to do something about carbon emissions and all these other things, but really looking at the impact that it's going to have on lower income people and Black folks specifically. Just your thoughts on that.
Sure. I wish I were writing notes because I've got a lot of thoughts on a lot of different pieces of that. But I do want to start by plugging the Climate Commitment Act because it's going to be on our November ballot, not the August primary, but on our November ballot. It's one of 3 initiatives that I would urge everyone to vote no on, the other being repeal of capital gains and the Law Cares Fund. But our climate commitment dollars, Climate Commitment Act was a cap and trade system where it's designed so that those polluters, those who are emitting pollution, have to pay per unit of pollution. And that revenue goes toward transportation and has gone and goes to local transportation projects that are tied to renewable energy projects. So an example is our Silverdale Transit Center opened last month at the ribbon cutting, which is very exciting. And the Climate Commitment Act dollars helped fund some of that. There's inductive charging stations now. I've talked to the head of Kitsap Transit about hydrogen fuel cells that they want to put on buses and how to make sure that the bus can run all day long if we're going to be on batteries. Separately, there's a separate discussion that is interesting to have around the revolution around batteries. Really is, we are in a renaissance when it comes to battery technologies, and it's just going to be more and more available and cheaper, but it's going to take a little while, right?
So should we slow down this, this massive push to have so many EVs by 2035? I mean, that's 10 years from now. I just don't see us being ready for that. But that is going to hurt low-income people.
Part of it is building out the infrastructure, right? I think the public infrastructure around EVs as well. So I don't know that I would say we should slow down the use of vehicles that have reduced emissions, but the equity piece, a part of the equity discussion is around making sure that infrastructure is available and not just privatized infrastructure. And I'm starting to see more of those chargers pop up in public spaces, and I think importantly, they should be free as well. Where the government can kind of subsidize some of that, because that's part of the access issue. You've got a vehicle; it's very expensive to purchase one, and the ability to charge some. I would want to highlight in Washington State, we have some of the lowest electricity rates in the country, and California, by comparison, so much more expensive to have an EV. Washington, we are very lucky, and I think we need to take advantage of that as well. But gosh, there was a lot that was said there. Climate commitment, EV, buses. I also want to encourage everyone to take a look at Kitsap Transit's 20-year plan, which they want to increase ridership. They want to make sure that our buses are moving toward more renewable energy sources. And I also just want to thank you for pointing out different modes of transportation are, or how our different populations utilize different modes of transportation, because it is important to recognize how different parts of our county and parts of our community utilize transit, which is going to be different. Some people never have and never will go on a ferry. Some people never will bike, and I do want to thank you for pointing that out. And I think that's part of the multimodal transit is needing to look at our entire transit system and what those ridership trends are as well.
Yeah, it's probably been at least a year or very close to that I've been on a ferry. So if I would typically drive around if I do,
right.
But there are a lot of folks that don't leave.
Yeah.
Right. This is where they're at. They're place bound.
Yeah. Right.
And again, I saw a lot of that teaching at the college. That folks very rarely left their own county, let alone spend time in Seattle or Tacoma,
right.
or leaving the state. And so that's a huge issue. For me, when you say Kitsap Transit has a 20-year plan, and I do encourage people to check that out, and their board meetings are open. I am broadcasting those now on the conduit, so you can have access to that. The issue is right now for us, a lot of us are suffering direly, and waiting 20 years and increasing ridership. And you're not representing Kitsap Transit, but it's frustrating to hear, because it's like, oh, it's coming. And then it's kind of a chicken and the egg type thing. When I came here in 97, I believe there was weekend transportation, and then it went away. And my thought on that is it could have been because of funding and the expense of running transportation in that way. But two, prioritizing, right? We prioritize the groups we want to prioritize. There were some folks that were running last year for commissioner, and they wanted to have a ferry from, I think it was Bremerton to Silverdale, as kind of a way to bring in tourism. It's like, wow, what about these people that need to get back and forth to work and to, childcare and everything else, the doctor's appointments, and the time that they lose trying to do these things, or just saying, hey, look, I'm looking at the opportunity cost and it's going to take me this long to do this. So I'm just not going to do it. So then I have delayed healthcare because it's just going to take me too long. So it's going to be really dire before I take advantage.
I do think part of the intra-county discussion also has to do with the movement of workers as well, for those who, just to breathe a little bit more into what I have heard from workers who live in Port Orchard and work in Bainbridge doing retail jobs, or live in Bremerton and need to get to Silverdale and don't have a vehicle. I do think that is something worth looking at in terms of our local economy and the ability to move, and so that people don't have to. It's harder and harder to live where we work, and I think the intra-county system also is trying to solve a little bit of that problem. So someone who, again, lives in Port Orchard and works in Paulsbo doesn't have to sit for a couple hours on the freeway.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Man, there's so much to unpack there. We can talk all day on all of these different things. Did you feel like you covered environmental justice enough? I kind of turned it the other way, and I know you're a big advocate on that. You were saying to vote no on. I just wanted to touch on those really quick. Can you just really quickly talk about why you're saying to either vote no or vote yes on each of those things? For many voters, we're busy, and there's so many things to try to. Oh, go ahead.
I'm only trying to look up the the numbers of. Maybe we'll follow up with the numbers of the specific initiatives. I don't have them all.
Sure.
The Climate Commitment Act is voting no on repealing it.
Okay.
And voting no on I-2117. So I oppose repeal of that because it is a great revenue source. It's not on the backs of low-income families. It's really the polluters who are helping now invest in renewable transportation. And I'll have to get the number. No on capital gains. Capital gains tax is a tax on gains through stocks, trading, things like that. And someone is taxed when they've hit $262,000 in gains.
Okay.
And they're taxed at 7% of that. Most of that money is going toward childcare education. And so we need to be thinking of that as a source for childcare and childcare access. I forget, it's a pretty small number of people in our county. I heard Commissioner Rolfes say I heard her say it was either 52 or 58 people, I believe, that are taxed on that in Kitsap County, and it's funding a significant number of childcare slots. That is another opportunity to get progressive revenue. We could lower, and I would support lowering the triggering threshold of, lower, instead of $262,000 in gains, fewer dollars would trigger the tax. And I think it's 11 states that have capital gains taxes that have actually higher rates that they tax at, up to 11%, I think, in California.
So let me ask you this.
Might be 13.
What do you say to these black men? About 50% of black men don't have any children. And so when you're taxing capital gains, what is the incentive? Why would I want to tax when I don't have any children and it's going into a child care fund? Why would I be on board for that?
Yeah. And I hear a lot of elderly voters as well say, why should I be voting for school bonds and levies? And my answer is children are our future. They are our investment. They are going to be our caretakers when we are elderly. They're going to be making laws that impact us. And I just firmly believe that we need to be investing in our future. It starts with our kids. All of the elderly people who don't have kids and who are not as interested in investing in kids, they were kids too, and they benefited from schools and an opportunity. And I think it is our moral imperative, more than anything else, is investing in our children, which actually leads into the last plank of mine.
Well, let's jump into that. I can buy the moral imperative, but I know that there's that can be a hard one for a lot of folks that, I don't have any children, or I'm looking at um, the way that youth are portrayed
Mhm.
in social media and on the news right now, why they're accurate or exaggerated,
Mhm.
right? And it's like, I don't want to um, support, the Kia boys or the Kia girls and all these,
What?
you know,
Mhm.
carjackings and
Well, when we're talking about childcare, we're talking about ages 0 through 5, and again, I mean, this is a core equity issue, equitable access to childcare. There, and women are still disproportionately the caretakers if there is a lack of childcare. When my son was 4 months old, I was getting ready to go back to work, and I was panicking because I was on a wait list that was over a year long, and it looked like I was going to have to decide: do I pause my legal career, or do I, to stay home with my son, or well, and actually, there was no alternative. That's what I was going to have to do. And at the 11th hour, I was able to get in a childcare slot.
let's quickly switch to that.
Sure.
So I went through a divorce several years ago, and you have to go through a class here in Washington. And so I took this class, I think it was in Silverdale, and it was a woman and a man teaching the class. And we sat down, and the first thing they said is, well, all the men in this room, we just want to apologize to you because you're screwed. And being a non-custodial parent, we are not afforded many of the rights as the custodial parent, right? It isn't typically an automatic 50-50. And so what you see is men, especially black men, are negatively impacted because they're not going to have the qualification for food assistance or housing the way that the custodial parent, which is typically a woman, has, right? One of the issues that I see that I wish would change is that it would automatically be 50-50, and that if one party is eligible for food assistance and housing assistance, then the other parent is also. Because what it does is it kind of pits the parents against each other from a financial aspect. So here, the custodial parent has TANF, has a housing voucher, has food assistance, has childcare, but then the non-custodial parent, when they have the child, doesn't have access to those things, right? And so they don't have the resources, but oftentimes are just as impoverished or worse because now they are required to pay child support, right? And so when you're looking at, okay, your support enforcement is $500 a month. But if I'm low income and I'm working an hourly wage job, one or two, and we're saying here, we've been talking this whole time, not today, but just in general, right? Society has been talking about how much housing is unaffordable, transportation and everything else. Then that $500 that is also going out, I can't make my $1,500 rent myself. And then I'm required to do this at the same time. And typically what's told the men is, well, you should have wrapped it up. You should know, you should have thought about that before you get the kid. But then the custodial parent, which is typically a woman, has those supports in there. So my thought on that would be, if there is a child, then it is automatically 50-50 and both parents have access instead of pitting them against each other from a financial standpoint. Just get your thoughts on that.
Sure. I think we should always be looking at what is in the best interests of the child, because every situation is going to be very different. Families are going to be different. I think, I mean, just kind of
But
circling
typically,
back.
I want to cut you off just for a second. We typically know from statistics that the best interest of the child is to be raised in a two-parent household.
Yes, but I mean, if we're talking about a situation where, and this happens in dependencies, where the lens is what is in the best interests of the child as well. And there's an advocate, the court appointed special advocate, whose sole job is to look at what is in the best interest. So if we're talking about a custody issue, and I do want to insert, when we're talking about also access to justice, we've recently in the past couple of years created a right to counsel in eviction proceedings. I would like to see a right to counsel when it comes to child custody, because too often the person that gets the child is the person that has representation, which is the person that has more financial resources. And child custody disputes should not be based off of who has more money to get a better lawyer.
I don't know. Is that true? I don't know if that's true. Because it seems like still, like even with wealthy families, typically the woman will get custody of the child. I think of NBA players and NFL players, right? And they're paying millions of dollars in child support, and to the tune of, we hear crazy stuff like $14,000 to $20,000 a month to the mother, right? And it's like, well, if that person is more financially stable, then you would think that child custody would stay with the financially strong person, but it actually is given to the person that's not financially strong. So I just want to push back on that because I don't actually see that.
Well, and I think, but when we're looking at higher profile people, child custody is such, and those determinations are so different state to state. So I think we would need to also look at, what is the Washington, and now I'm curious and want to look it up, right? Like, what is the Washington experience versus the, Alabama or California experience in terms of how those determinations are made? Because it is very different state to state and how that happens as well. But I would go back to childcare access. Oftentimes, the primary caretaker has to decide, am I making enough to justify paying a high cost for childcare? We know it's driving people out of the workforce because oftentimes the money shakes out that it's cheaper to have someone at home than to go into the workforce. So that's another reason we're going to have more people participating in our workforce if we have childcare access, which goes back to why we need to keep the capital gains tax in place. And then moving over to the CARES Act, while I had concerns about how it was implemented, the idea I think is important. We need to start planning for long-term care, something that might take someone, a disability or an unexpected illness, to be able to have a safety net resource so that we can help people in that time of need. And that's what the WA Cares Fund is for, to be able to provide, in-home care services. And there is a monetary cap. I think right now it's a $36,000 lifetime cap. And anybody who's helped an elderly parent or knows how quickly that money disappears. But also, it can be a bridge for people who just need short-term support as well. And so it's I've read that it's our first in the nation long-term care program.
Oh, wow.
And I think it's we need to continue investing in that.
Yeah, I think it's I would love to see what you were saying, to have that representation for the non-custodial parent. But if who did you say is the one that determines where what's the best interest of the child?
So I'm kind of conflating two separate things. So the best interest of the child is the framework in a dependency case, a court-appointed special advocate. Their sole job is to look through that lens, which can then, they could either side with the state or they could side with the family.
But historically, they don't, right? Because if they're looking at what's in the best interest of the child, in a typical sense, you have two people that have come together to have a child, right? Statistically, kids do better in a two-parent household. This household is now broken up, right? So then they should have equal time with both. We don't do that. What we say is we set a primary care provider, and then that person is eligible for all the resources, and this one becomes a payee into that system. And typically that payee, which is the man, is harmed by that, right? Because they're not, again, like I was saying, they don't have access to those resources that she has, or to the custodial parent, because it does happen the other way, just not near the percentages, right? So if we start off with the level playing field and say, hey, we know that a parent needs equal time with the mother and the father, right? And this determination happens, and I've been working in social services for about 20-some years, right? And you'll see where you have mothers who are suffering from addiction, criminal history, and other things, and they're still trying to get the child back to the parent. And you have dad over here that's just struggling and just trying to make it every day, and the priority is still there, right? And so we see it, and men have remained silent, because we're ostracized and we're told, well, you know what, suck it up, just deal with it, be a man. Again, well, you shouldn't have, had a kid with this person. That's your problem. Now you got to deal with it. That's your responsibility. The kids, right? The moral argument. And so we have all these things that are pitted against us, and then there's no advocacy for it. And then it just kind of is the status quo. Now, I am happy to report that things have been slowly changing in Olympia, where you're starting to see more of, and I think nationwide too, we're starting to see a little bit more balance. I just don't think that pendulum is swinging fast enough to the middle, because you're, the situation really does still hurt the child, right? And if we look at some of those statistics, I believe it's two-parent household, kids do the best, and then I believe it's male households the child does best, and then from there on, right? But we ignore those statistics that are there, and then we do just the opposite. So I would just like to see, like you said, that representation would be big. And from a lawyer standpoint, I would love for you to advocate in that way, and make that an even playing field. Because as I said before, I think ultimately that you want both parents to thrive so the child can thrive.
Well, and I think when you mentioned advocacy, my thought was to the bill that you taught me about at the debate, John Lovick's bill, which is very exciting, supporting young men and
boys.
I was reading,
Yeah, boys,
yes, and I was reading just a little bit about it, and it was really exciting to see that it has such strong bipartisan support. What it's aiming to do to help fathers, and that's kind of what got me thinking about it. This discussion about custody and custodial rights. Hopefully, I'm hoping that bill will pass and would be a strong supporter of it.
Man, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a big deal. I love that. Now, where are we? We talked about education. Can we jump into education?
Sure. Yeah.
So because this is your fourth framework. And then we had housing on there. So there's a lot of tendrils that connect to the other one. But let's talk about education.
Sure. So I am a former classroom teacher. I taught pre-K and kindergarten. I taught elementary and junior high English, and I taught high school marching band. I'm a percussionist. So I care deeply about education. I was a teacher before I was a mom, but I also do want to point out that I've got two little boys who are 3 and 5, and my oldest will be entering into our public schools this fall with kindergarten.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So, but access to quality early learning programs is something that I am incredibly passionate about. I joined the board of Kitsap Community Resources several years ago, specifically because I wanted to support their Head Start program and access to quality early learning and education. So when it comes to funding our schools, I believe the legislature has not done its paramount duty outlined in our state constitution to fully fund our schools. After the McCleary lawsuit, we have seen appropriations for schools going down. We need to.
Can you tell me what that is, the McCleary lawsuit?
Oh, sure. The McCleary lawsuit. So several years ago, the legislature was sued for failing to fund the paramount duty to fund public education. And that lawsuit then became the focus of the legislature in trying to fix that. There was a huge investment as a result of the lawsuit that went into public education, but it left out special education. I've talked to a lot of parents with kids on IEPs, individual education plans, who have felt not supported, and that they don't have the resources to make sure that their kids are getting the education that they are entitled to. That lawsuit didn't support increase in wages to our classified workforce, which are secretaries, bus drivers, custodians, and paraeducators, among others. And paraeducators are a critical backbone of our education workforce. They are helping students who are multilingual, helping students, oftentimes whose parents might not be English speakers yet. They might be newer to the community, and helping students with disabilities. They are helping our kids who are most at risk of falling through the cracks in our public schools. We need to be supporting them. It's the right thing to do to support our whole education workforce and recognize their contributions across the board to helping with our kids. And of course, it has the end result of it also helps our students as well. So,
and the teachers, right?
yes, absolutely. So I am a strong proponent, and I will continue to ring the bell and say we need to dedicate more money toward education and more money toward healthcare. It comes back to the infrastructure of opportunity is helping those who have fallen further behind. Economic inequality is just increasing. We see it traveling north to south in our district. Incomes get lower as we drive further south. Inequities increase as we drive further from north to south. And I was telling you, I know before the podcast began, part of what's interesting about this campaign is hearing, I always ask what's on your mind as a voter. And the conversations, there are common themes. People care deeply about schools and thriving communities and strong, healthy environment and ecosystem and access to healthcare services. These are things that impact us no matter where we live, but they impact us differently depending on where we live. And the quality of our schools and what's going on in the Bainbridge School District or the North Kitsap School District is very different. What's going on in our Bremerton School District and the funding that's going to all of those. So there are issues and old formulas that came out of the McCleary lawsuit that were meant to create more equity between school districts that need to be updated because we have very different demographics now than we did after the McCleary case. The conversation I had recently up in the northern part of our district was around reproductive rights. I gave a presentation. I'm proud to be the only candidate in my race who's endorsed by Planned Parenthood Alliance Advocates and Pro-Choice Washington. And reproductive rights has been a central part of my campaign. We don't just need reliable votes. We need people who are going to champion these issues and move them forward as well. And it's a part of the healthcare discussion, right? But especially with what is going on at the federal level. These rights feel like they are at stake and on the chopping block. Even access to contraceptives is now up in the air, right? Depending on what happens in November. Body autonomy. So anyway, I was talking about reproductive rights, and someone came up after me and said, I support that issue. I think that's great, but you really need to focus on local issues. And I had to gently push back and say, well, this is a local issue. The number of OBGYNs we have in our county, I think can probably be counted on two hands.
And if you get a good one.
And access to contraception is a local issue. To be able to have a visit to whatever provider you need to get access to have reproductive health services. And we know that we have providers that do not offer full spectrum reproductive health. So it is very much a local issue. I talked to someone else. It's always a little weird to me when I get to a door and someone said, "Oh, everything's great. Everything's wonderful." And I'm glad that everything is wonderful for them. And the conversations I'm having at a lot of doors are people who are in survival mode. And for some people, talking about mitigating climate change is not forefront on their mind, not because they don't care, but because they are trying to make sure their family's fed. They are worried that they're going to get evicted if they get another medical bill, and so it's been a really great opportunity to talk with people in our district about what their neighbors are saying in other parts of the district. And I feel like it's a really important part of being a representative. It's not just going into communities and soliciting feedback and getting ideas and amplifying the leadership across our district, but also, I feel it's my responsibility to say, here in Bremer, hi Bremertonians, this is what I've been hearing in Kingston, and Hansville. This is what I'm hearing at doors in Bremerton, because it brings us together. I think it brings more awareness and nuance to how we all care about healthcare access, but what does that mean to different parts of the district? I was at a door on Bainbridge Island, and someone said, I said increasing health insurance coverage is very important to me, and it's something I would like to help champion. And they said, well, health insurance coverage is not the problem. That's not the issue, because almost everyone's covered. And I had to kind of gently walk back and say, well, I just talked to someone yesterday who was just kicked off Apple Health because they got a promotion.
I know someone that just happened.
Right. And it's it's not meant to be at all disrespectful, but we have different lenses based on what we're experiencing in our day to day. And there's things that I'm learning from you that I didn't know about, because it's not an obstacle that I face, And so I think as I learn more and hear more stories, sharing that and sharing what our different experiences are only makes us better, because people who might not face a particular issue will still care about it, and saying, well, your neighbor just 10 miles down the road, this is something it's in their day to day. They're in survival mode here when it comes to this specific issue. And people have been enjoying having those conversations and learning about their neighbors that they don't see day to day, but we're in this community together. And it just gives us more of an appreciation for just the diversity of our district across, and I say that not just racial, not just geographic, socioeconomic, disability, kids or not having kids. There's just diversity of life experience that's been just a real privilege to learn more about and to connect us all together.
Well, this is the longest that you and I have had a conversation. Yeah. And I'll tell you, in just our short time, the thing that I appreciate most about you so far is, I think you said you knocked on, is it 80,000 doors?
Actually, oh no, I wish. As of yesterday, we hit our milestone of 10,000 doors.
10,000 doors.
Yes.
If I was close to the horn, I'd hit the horn for that. That's huge. But what is so big, and I think what you're doing by doing that is connecting to people how important it is to vote down ballot. Right? This is a presidential election year, so we know that it's going to be higher. But you are highlighting how, don't vote no on this, vote yes on this, and why it's important, and connecting it to their everyday life. The other piece is sharing stories about their neighbors and perspectives that, hey, I don't swim in that particular aquarium, so that's not my experience. Well, I didn't know that, I know someone like Barbara. I know someone like, James, and I don't want them to suffer in that way. Making that connection when I say, hey, well, many of us don't have kids. I do have kids, by the way. But so why should I care about that? And then being able to articulate, hey, from a moral standpoint, from I would say from a safety standpoint, from people that say, that you want to get a handle on crime and safety. Well, that's a piece of it, right? You have to invest in children so that they have opportunities and options, so that isn't an option that they engage in, right? So there are ways to frame things, and the only way to do that is to have conversations with people. And so that's what I most appreciate about you, just in the short time that we've met, and spending time with people. Now, I'm going to leave you with the heavy one. I know you have a heart out, but you talked about reproductive rights. And as you know, I'm a huge advocate for Black men, right? And I belong to part of a group. There's more than 10,000 Black men, and it's the Black Male Political Agenda. And I'll give you a copy of it. But one of the things in reproductive rights is a woman should have the right to choose. 1,000,000% agree with that, right? So she should have the right to have the child, abort the child, or give the child up for adoption, if that's what her choice is. But then too should a man. And so there's a term that most people haven't heard, which is financial abortion. And so if a woman says, I'm not ready to be a parent right now and I have an abortion, then a man should too have the right to say, I'm not ready to be a father. I should be able to financially abort. And the state and the government should not say, you're responsible for that child, right? Because the woman has the right, because of her reproductive rights, to say, I don't want that, for whatever those reasons are, and we don't question what those reasons are. We should not question what those reasons are. What are your thoughts on that? This is probably the first time you've heard this terminology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would not advocate changing our laws if someone decides to take their to have a baby, right? I would not support changing the laws to, I'm just learning the term today. I wouldn't advocate changing the framework.
Why? Because because that seems like a double standard, right? If a woman has the right to choose and she chooses that she is not ready for the child or does not want the child for whatever reason, then the man should have that same and equal choice.
I think it's different because and I think they're two different issues that we're somewhat talking about, because the right to choose is about agency over one's body. And so, and I would love to.
But that is agency over my own body, right? So if let's get this scenario: a woman and a man can conceive. She says, I don't want to keep the child. She makes that decision irrespective of the man, and she should. I have no disagreement with that. But the opposite should be fair. That she could say, well, you know what? I want to keep the child. And he say, you know what? I'm not ready to be a father. I don't want to be financially responsible. He should also have that choice, right? So while the baby is physically growing in her and that impacts her, he is impacted for life after that if he doesn't have the ability to opt out of that. So while it doesn't have um the child isn't growing inside of him, it does impact him on the other side, right? So, and then the state enforces his life from that point on, right? You will pay child support, we'll take your driver's license, we'll take your passport, which actually happened to me. And within the last 10 years, they would not renew my passport because I still owe child support on my oldest daughter. And so those things are very punitive, right? Well, we won't renew your driver's license, but I need my license to go to work, right? So those things happen, right? So it does impact us physically in that sense, not in the direct sense. So I just want to try to. I know it's a new concept for a lot of people, but
yeah,
equity is equity, right?
I'm just thinking realistically, if that were to pass, if something like that were to pass, then I can't imagine a world in which men would ever have to pay. Like if that law were to pass, then women would just, who already have a disproportionate child care duties typically.
But they wouldn't if it was 50-50 custody right from the gate, right?
But and I'm also not really understanding if it's a 50-50 custody, how that overlays with the idea that someone can say, I didn't want this child, so I'm bowing out of any co-responsibility.
Well, I'm not saying that you don't get to have the child and then say, oh, I don't want the child, right? Typically, most babies are born in relationship, right? So there's a relationship, the baby is born, they're together.
Yeah.
Then they break up.
Yeah.
Then it should be 50-50. Well, he can't opt out then. They decided to have the child together, right? A married couple, they're married, they have a child, right? They're married. He doesn't get to opt out. The child is there. You see what I'm saying? So now if there's a divorce, then it goes 50-50 and then they go from there. The only way that comes into that situation is what do the kids call it today? I have a situationship, right? And there's a child that is she's pregnant. It's like, well, I don't want anything to do with this child. Well, if she says, well, you know what, I want to have this child, he should be able to check out then, not post, right?
So I have a strong reaction to not wanting to change the laws around that, but I would love to revisit.
But you have strong reaction to change laws on lots of other things.
Right. And I would love to, because I'm not being at all articulate right now, obviously. Kind of going back to what I was saying before,
I know there's a big shocker one. So
No.
audience is probably like, what is he talking about? I don't even know this guy anymore.
No, I would love to be able to, because I know we're over, but to be able to come back on and to be able to very clearly articulate why I would not advocate changing those laws. Yeah. But no, I appreciate the
I don't
the
even
new
know
concept,
I don't know
right?
what to do with this.
Right. Right.
It's a new one. But that's part of talking to people. And again,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
why I said that's the thing I appreciate most about you
Mm,
is going out and having those conversations with people. And I just say, just know that there are a lot of men that feel this way,
mm,
that society tells them they shouldn't feel this way. They shouldn't advocate for what they believe is right. And women through feminism have been doing this and made great strides. The LGBT community has made great strides because they said, no, we will be heard, right? The Black community, our indigenous community, whatever community is fighting and advocating for what they believe is right, while everyone else doesn't believe that because otherwise it'd be being done, right? And then it's like, now we're here. Um, so for sure. I want to give you the last word. I really thank you for coming on. I wish we had more time. I got a bunch of questions we
oh
didn't even
gosh.
get
Oh, I
to,
believe it.
but no, but it's good. Like I said, we were talking earlier, and I said, the interview will be organic, right? I
Yeah.
think we stayed in the wheelhouse of your points, the things that you're advocating for, and just kind of overlaying, kind of where my interests lie and interests of those that I advocate
Mhm.
for
Yep.
lie also, right? But I want to give you the last word.
Yeah. Well, my last word is just deep appreciation for you inviting me onto this show. I would urge everyone to vote in the primary. So we have ballots have dropped, so everyone should have received their ballot. If they
Mine is across the room. I was going to hold it up.
okay, yeah, if you haven't received your ballot, you should call the auditor because you should have already. There's still time to register to vote until the 6th. So would encourage everybody to vote. Again, as you say, these down ballot races are incredibly impactful. The further down, the more impactful on your day to day, and the more local. These races are won and lost by sometimes less than 100 votes,
Mhm.
right?
I know.
And there's yes, yes, and we are even the three Democrats on the ballot. We are very different. We have different platforms. We have different qualifications and experiences. So, would ask you to vote Brynn Felix on your ballot. But more importantly, just get out and vote. Make your voice heard because it is impactful. So, thank you, Marwan.
Thank you. Now I gave you one. I said I give you the final word, but now I got the second thing that I appreciate most about you, and that is you didn't dodge and you asked the question, and you didn't placate me. Uh, and if you didn't agree, you didn't agree, and so that is super respectable. What we see from a lot of politicians is circling around an issue or a question, dodging it, not answering it. We saw that in the debate, right? So I really appreciate that.
Certainly.
I
Yeah.
would rather you tell me how you really feel than tell me what you think I want to hear, and then you don't go to Olympia and
Right.
do those things. So lots of big respect for that.
Well, I know we're doing back and forth last word, but I do want to plug just because it reminded me. I was on Outlaw Radio
Mhm.
last week with a libertarian, Republican, moderate Democrat. We were talking about infrastructure, talking about taxes. You can imagine a much wider frame of disagreement,
Mhm.
but it was very respectful. They were gracious to invite me on, and if you want to see some lively conversation, that's a fun one to watch too.
All right. Shout out to Outlaw Radio. Check him out. Uh, all right. So, Brynn Felix, again, it is election time, y'all. So make sure that you get your ballot. Super easy to do. You can just go online. You have until August 6th. So do not miss out. This is the time. You see what's happening in our country. So regardless of what your issues are, whether you're a single voter issue or multi-voter issue, this is the time for you to get in, get involved. Your vote does make a difference. Your voice does make a difference. And the more people that raise their voice, that's how we're going to get the change that we want to see. All right. So for Brynn Felix, I am Marwan Cameron. This is The Conduit. As always, take care of yourself and take care of each other.